When I was asked if I'd be interested in a powered mixer, as a band sound guy, my initial reaction was, I don't think it really fits in with my needs. It's not the kind of equipment that I normally use. But then he told me that this unit doesn't work, it needs repair. Well, now I'm interested. And that he'd give it to me for 20 bucks. How can I refuse? I figured for 20 bucks, how can I lose? I can probably get this thing repaired and maybe I'll resell it, who knows. Well, it's turned out to be a useful addition in my equipment collection, surprisingly so. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about powered mixers in this episode, where they fit, where they don't, and whether or not they're even relevant today. Now, as a band sound guy, my initial reaction was that I don't have much need for a powered mixer. It just doesn't have the capabilities that I need to run a band. A powered mixer is an all-in-one PA with a mixing console, a main output stage with a power amplifier, and some vocal effects, all wrapped into one box with a handle. How convenient. But that convenience comes at a price, and that price is capability. For example, when I'm running a 5-piece rock band, I'm probably going to need 3 to 5 vocal mics, probably a couple of channels for guitars, channel for bass guitar, couple of channels for keyboards, half a dozen or more channels to cover the drums, and a couple more channels for bumper music and other ancillary things. So I'm up to at least 12, maybe 16 channels to run a 5-piece rock band. I've had instances where I've needed a 24-channel board, but those are outliers. But this powered mixer, which I think is pretty typical, offers me 6 channels. And so I'd be in a pretty tight spot trying to run a full band with only 6 channels of PA. In addition, I would like to give each musician on stage their own independent monitor mix. So I need a separate bus for each of the musicians to drive their monitor and give them the mix that they desire on stage. This powered mixer gives me a single monitor bus. So all of the monitors out of this mixer are funneled down into a single bus and a single monitor mix. And so that would be really limiting for a normal band situation. When I mix a normal band, a rock or a country band, I typically have 4 vocal effects happening. A plate reverb, a room reverb, an echo, and maybe a harmonizer type effect, or something like that. This unit here has a single reverb effect. And this is a pretty vintage unit, so it includes a spring reverb, which is pretty groovy. But a more modern unit would certainly contain digital effects, but probably not to the same extent that I'm used to when working with bands. This unit here also contains about 150 watts thereabouts of output power amplifier, which is a lot lower power than I normally run when mixing bands. So there's a lot of limitations that come with the powered mixer, and it's probably too limited for a band situation. But I found it to be a really useful device. I've used it in a lot of situations where I've needed small PA, and I didn't need to break out the big PA in order to satisfy the requirements. For example, I've had people ask me to provide a limited PA so that they could do a staff meeting. They just needed a microphone and some speakers, and they were talking to a couple hundred people at the company, and that's all they needed. This worked out great. I've had some friends do small weddings where they needed a PA for the officials in the wedding and to play a little background music. Again, this worked out great. When I've had parties in the backyard and I've just needed a modest power amplifier to drive some speakers, again, perfect fit. If you're running a bar restaurant and you need a little bit of PA in order to do some calling of bingo numbers. Again, perfect fit. Even if you're a musician on stage and you have a 1 or 2 person act, let's say you've got 2 people up on stage, one of them plays keyboards, the other plays guitar, you've got a rhythm machine or a drum box, you're both singing. Well, you could easily cover that with 6 channels. You've got a little bit of vocal effects. The 2 of you can probably share a monitor mix. And it doesn't take an enormous amount of power to do a show like that. So this would be a good fit. You could bring in one small box to cover most of your PA needs. Just this box, a couple of speakers, a couple of microphones, there you go. So there are places where a powered mixer works really well, and it's super convenient because it's one box and it's got a handle on it. But there are other cases where you need more PA, such as running a band. So I think that there is a place for a powered PA box, and there's a lot of situations where it's a perfect fit. Now, is it still relevant today? That's a good question. I think there are cases where this is a really great fit. For example, if you're running a bar restaurant venue and you need a small PA system for calling out your bingo numbers, this is perfect because it's super easy, it's super compact, and all the people need to do is turn it on and control the volume. And equalization is right here. It's super simple. And I think that any of your staff could easily operate this machine. But what if you were a 1 or 2 person act doing small venues? Well, again, this has enough channels in it and enough power, and the 2 of you could probably happily share a monitor mix. And so again, it would be a great fit. Not a problem at all. But is it what I would do? I'm not so sure. Because these days we have small digital mixers. For example, I use a X32 Rackmount mixer, which is smaller than this device and has all of the capabilities of this and a lot more, with the exception that it does not include a power amp. And so you could bring in a small digital rack mount mixer, have a lot more capability, more effects such as compression and limiting, parametric EQ, much more sophisticated equalization, multiple vocal effects, better quality vocal effects, multiple buses, and it's all in a package that's about the size of this, if not smaller and lighter. But it does lack a power amp module, which is really no issue these days because you could just bring in some powered speakers for your main speakers and or your stage monitors. And so I think with a digital mixer in a rack mount format, you could do everything this could do in about the same footprint, and you could control it remotely with your iPad that would be sitting up on a stand on stage in front of you. So if you needed to make any little tweaks, you could do it right there and then in front of you rather than turning around and walking over to the corner of the stage where this guy is located. So I think that would be a better solution, albeit probably at a little higher price point, but it would give you a lot more capability. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. If you're into this kind of content and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a quick second and reach down and click that subscribe button, and be sure to hit that bell icon so that you're notified when new content drops and you don't miss anything good. These actions help the channel grow, and I appreciate your support. Now let's talk a little bit about this Peavey XR600B. This is the XR600B, meaning there was an XR600A. Peavey has made these for a long time, and I think these days they're probably up to version F or so. This unit was made back around 1978 to 1980, and the reason why I was interested in it was because the individual told me it didn't work, it needed repair, and I'm pretty familiar with Peavey gear from this era. It tends to be really rugged and fairly easy to service. And Peavey has also been very friendly about end-user servicing. I was confident that I would be able to get schematics and, if need be, parts from Peavey in order to get this unit operating. So I got the unit home, and sure enough, it didn't work. It had a set of transistors that were blown in the output stage, which is not untypical with power amps. And so the only problem turned out to be output stage transistors and the emitter resistors associated with them. Fortunately, it didn't have a cascading failure that took out any other parts, so it was a pretty simple repair. I replaced all of the output transistors with on-semiconductor replacements. And a quick note here is when I replace power transistors and power amplifiers, I always replace the entire set. That's because the group of power transistors operate kind of like a team of horses pulling a cart. And I want all of them to be pulling an equal load. I want them all to be evenly matched in their power and in their performance. And so I don't want some of the transistors to be taking a lot more load than others and being strained while others are not being worked hard. I want that load evenly distributed across all the transistors. So that means that I will pull out all of the transistors in the output stage of the power amplifier and place them with an entirely new set that are hopefully all from the same batch, so they all have very similar characteristics and they carry that load evenly. I'm also careful to purchase my transistors from authorized resellers, so I'm sure that I'm getting the real thing. Unfortunately, there are a lot of counterfeit parts on the market, and some of those counterfeit parts look really good, and they might perform okay, but they're not as rugged as the originals. And so I want to make sure that the parts that I'm putting in there are at the same quality as the ones that were originally in place, or better. So I replaced all the output transistors, the emitter resistors that are associated with them, and unit started working just fine again. I threw it on my AP1 audio analyzer, and I was positively impressed by the performance. I thought it was actually really good. It was better than I expected. Let's take a more detailed look at this particular unit. This is a Peavey XR600B. And of course there are a lot of different powered mixers on the market, and they have varying capabilities, but I think this unit is pretty typical. We have a low Z input, which accepts a microphone input for a dynamic microphone. This unit does not include a phantom power supply, so that limits your ability to use condenser microphones or active DI boxes that require phantom power. If you wanted to use those sorts of things, you'd have to have a phantom power supply that would be inserted in line on that microphone channel. We have a gain control, which controls how much of this signal gets driven out to your main bus and to your main loudspeaker. This is a mono unit, so there's only one speaker output. Of course, you could drive multiple speakers, but it's not going to be a stereo output. We have one monitor bus, which is controlled by this control right here. So this is how much of this input gets sent into your stage monitors, or a secondary output that you could use for driving another amplifier that goes somewhere else. We have low and high frequency tone controls. On a more capable mixer, I'd like to see things such as a high pass filter and more stages of equalization, preferably parametric equalization, where you can adjust the exact frequency that you're targeting as well as the gain at that point. And so with a digital mixer, you're going to have a lot more sophisticated EQ, but hey, you get basic EQ with each channel for lows and highs, and you get the amount of drive of this channel into the effects bus. And on this unit, that's a old-fashioned spring reverb, but it does give you the option of tapping in and using a different kind of effect if you wanted to, externally. And so that's the basic mixer that's included in this powered mixer. And of course channels 2 through 6 are identical to channel 1. So you get 6 channels of inputs with this unit. Here we have the output section, and we have a power indicator. We have an indicator for compression, which is the Peavey DDT compression. So it prevents you from easily clipping the output stage. As you hit maximum power, it automatically starts kicking in compression to prevent distortion from coming through. And so through the use of the Peavey DDT compression, you can drive this unit pretty hard without it sounding bad, and you can get more output out of it if you're willing to touch that compression. It also prevents clipping, which helps prevent damage to your loudspeakers that are attached. We have our main output control, which controls how loud your main speakers are. We have your amount of drive that goes to your stage monitors, so you can control overall stage monitor volume here. And this is the amount of drive into the effects bus, which is the spring reverb on this unit. So it's how much signal gets pushed into the spring reverb. Then up here, this is the amount of signal from the reverb that goes back out into your main speakers, the amount of signal from the reverb that gets sent down to your stage monitors, and an auxiliary input that can get mixed into your mains. You have a graphic equalizer, which affects your main outputs, your main speakers. So if you have feedback or particular frequencies that are accentuated in your loudspeaker system or your room, you can do some adjustments here to try to make things sound as good as possible and to improve the amount of gain before feedback to some extent. They give you some signal taps here on the bottom. These are the output signals that go to the mains, so this would be the same signal that's going to your main loudspeakers, so you could tap off of that to another amplifier to more outputs, or maybe to a recorder or something. This is the output for your monitor bus. This unit only contains one power amplifier that goes to your main loudspeakers. And so for your monitors, you'd have to use powered monitors or an external amplifier driving those speakers. And so in practice, I would probably go from the monitor output into an external equalizer and then into an amplifier driving those loudspeakers. Or maybe an amplifier with some tone control, like DSP, that kind of thing. This is the output of the effects bus. So if you wanted to use your own effects, you could tap into here rather than using the built-in spring reverb. There's a patch point at the beginning and the end of the graphic EQ, so you could patch in your own effects here into the output bus. There's a Footswitch input that allows you to kill the reverb, the spring reverb that's in here. So you could mute that reverb during, like, between songs when you're talking and you don't want effects in your vocals. There's an auxiliary input which is associated with this control, so you could drive another signal in and mix that in with your output bus. And there's a tap to provide an input directly into the power amp of this unit, so basically you could bypass all of this stuff and just drive a signal directly into the unit's power amp. Now, looking at the back side of this amplifier, you'll see that it's a pretty significant power amplifier with a whole lot of heatsink, and this whole unit weighs over 40 pounds, so it's fairly significant. This is the Peavey 400BH amplifier module, which was used in a number of products from Peavey at the time. I think BH stands for bass head, which is one of their bass guitar amplifiers where this was originally used. But it's a fairly strong amplifier module that's capable of driving 2 ohm loads. And back here the nomenclature says that you should receive 300 watts of power out of it into 2 ohms. There's a power switch which has 2 positions. Off is in the center and on is on either side. And it handles ground slightly differently from one side to the other, so in the case that you experience some hum or noise, you can try flipping the switch the other direction to see if that quiets down. I haven't had any problems with hum or noise out of this unit. Power supply fuse, and that's about it. You've got some speaker outputs right here, which are the main outputs, and these two connectors are the same signal. So you have one amplifier module that drives your main loudspeakers, and you can easily tap two speakers off the amplifier, but both of these connectors are tied together internally, so it's really the same thing. So it's just daisy chaining your two speakers together. Pretty simple and pretty rugged. So that's the XR600B powered mixer. Now let's take a quick look at the performance that I received from this unit after repairing the transistors that failed in this unit's amplifier. A quick disclaimer, I am not representing Peavey Corporation, and I'm not claiming that the performance measured in the upcoming slides is necessarily representative of a production unit. It's merely the performance that I measured of my unit after replacing parts with some non-OEM parts. I'm also not claiming that my test instrumentation is perfectly accurate, nor are my measurement methodologies. This is just simply a quick test that I did after repairing the equipment to make sure that it was properly functional. Here is the frequency response as measured from the microphone input all the way through the system. The graph appears to be a little bit curved, but do keep in mind that the scale is very expanded, and we're seeing less than 1 dB variation from 50 Hz all the way to the top of the scale. And in addition, those curves represent where the tone controls in the channel happen to be sitting. And so they were approximately in a flat position, and this is what the result was. Within a dB of response across the whole spectrum, I consider that to be quite good. Since this was an amplifier module repair, that was really the focus of my attention, was the output amplifier itself. And this graph shows the frequency response of the output power amplifier after the mic preamps. And as you can see, it's quite flat. It's within about a dB from 20 Hz to 20 kHz. So I consider that performance to be excellent. This graph shows the total harmonic distortion of the power amplifier module when operating at low power. As you can see, it's consistently at approximately 0.03% across the entire audio spectrum. I think that is outstanding performance. This chart shows the amount of power the unit is able to deliver at different frequencies across the spectrum, and it shows the point at which the amplifier reaches 3% distortion, which is just the very beginning of clipping. The chart isn't perfectly flat and smooth, and I assume that has to do with the characteristics of the built-in DDT limiting. But as you can see, it's fairly consistent at around 150 watts into 8 ohms across the whole spectrum, more or less. And this is a rather strong amplifier that can easily drive low impedance loads and can drive significantly more power into more challenging loads. But this measurement at 8 ohms indicates to me that the amplifier is working properly and exceeding its manufacturer's specifications, and is able to deliver that performance across the entire audio spectrum. So again, I think this represents excellent performance. Keep in mind that this is intended to be a rugged and portable PA system. It's not marketed as audiophile level gear. However, the performance that I'm measuring is quite excellent, and I don't believe that this equipment is going to be impacting your audio quality whatsoever, and it should satisfy even discriminating listeners. Any concerns about distortion or audio performance limitations, I believe, would be coming from the microphones or the loudspeakers that are attached, which are going to impart many orders of magnitude more distortion than this amplifier does. I hope you found this presentation to be interesting and informative, and choose to subscribe, and to come back and catch the next episode of Sound Advice.